Hey, what's going on guys? My name is Anson and welcome back to a brand new video. So in this video tutorial, we're going to be implementing pagination from scratch. So this is going to actually require us to have a front and back end. So the front end is going to obviously be responsible for displaying all of the results, and then the back end is going to be where we're going to get our results from. So for those who don't really know what pagination is, allow me to explain it very simply. So you can think of pagination like navigating between one page to another, or also known as paging. So it's kind of like when you're reading a book and you're flipping through each page, and each page can have a set of records, or in a book it would have, like a bunch of words, or if you're, let's say, dealing with a dictionary or a glossary, it will have its own words, like its own definitions and stuff. Okay. But in an application, when you implement something like pagination, each page would typically have its own set of records corresponding to the domain of what it is that you're paginating. So let's say, for example, if you have an application that is supposed to display a list of restaurants, well, there could be a numerous amount of restaurants. You don't know how many restaurants there could possibly be. But let's say, for example, there's 50,000 restaurants, okay? You don't want to show the user, or you don't want to send the user from the back end to the front end 50,000 restaurants all at once, because that can actually crash the client that they're trying to access the application from. So you don't want to do that. Instead, what you want to do is you want to send a smaller amount of restaurants and allow the user to navigate to the next page on the front end. So let's say if they're currently on the first page and they see 10 restaurants or 20, and let's say they aren't satisfied with those 20 restaurants, what they're going to do is they're going to click on the second page, or they're going to click on the next button, and that'll take them to the next page, which will give them the next set of restaurants that is returned from the database. So essentially, they can keep clicking on the next page until there are no more pages, so that's when they reach the very end. So that's the simple idea of pagination. It gives the user a better experience to navigate through smaller sets of records from the database instead of just seeing everything all at once, because that's usually not an ideal way to allow users to see your data. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. So for this project, we're going to be using React for the front end, and we're going to be using Express for the backend. We're going to be doing this fully in JavaScript, no TypeScript whatsoever. And we're going to be focusing primarily on fetching data, and we're actually going to create our own custom hook to set up the pagination stuff. With the front end, we're really just going to have a table that's just going to be populated with the data that we fetch from the backend. And on the backend, like I said, we're using Express. We're also going to be needing to communicate with the database. For the database ORM, we are going to be using type ORM, but you can honestly use any ORM in any database. So if you want to use MongoDB or PostgreSQL, you can definitely do that, and you can use whatever ORM you want. The main takeaway to getting the pagination to work is going to come from the magic with databases, and I'll explain a little bit more about that when we get to that part. Okay, but any database engine would work fine because they should have certain keywords and certain ways that you can select items from the database to satisfy our pagination needs. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and create a directory, and I'll call this pagination tutorial, and we'll just call this pagination tutorial. So I'll cd into pagination tutorial, and we're going to create the React app first. So I'm going to type npm create React app, and I'll just call this pagination React, or I'll call this React pagination. Okay. So this is going to take some time. In the meantime, let me go ahead and cd into that same directory again. You can see the folder has already been created. I'm going to create the Express API folder. Okay, so right now we have two folders, so we're going to be working with those two. Okay, so I won't set up the Express stuff just yet. Let's deal with the front end stuff first, which is really not going to be anything complicated. We're just going to set up our table. So let me go ahead and open up everything in Visual Studio Code. So we have our text editor of choice, Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to go ahead and go into the React folder first. And what I'm going to do is, let me start up the project. So let's go to, there should be right over here. There we go. So we'll click on start so we can start up our React app. And you can also just run it from the terminal too if you want. So this should open up our application, and I'm just going to go ahead and just delete all of this stuff. I'm going to delete the app.css import and the logo import. I'll also delete the app.css file as well, and I'll delete the app.test.js file as well. I'll get rid of all the CSS in here, and I'll delete the logo file as well, and that'll be it for now. We can leave everything else alone. Okay. So what I'll do is let me just simply add a div over here. I'm going to go inside the index.css file, and this is just personal preference, but I'm going to set a darker background just because the white background is just way too bright. So that'll be easier for us to see things. Okay, and we're not really going to be focusing much on styling at all. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much it. We're going to go ahead and create a folder called components. And inside of this components folder, we're going to create a component called table.jsx. And this is just going to represent our data table. Okay, so we'll call this a table. And it's going to have a prop called results. And that's basically going to be our data source. Okay, and that can either come from a remote API, it can come from a file, it can come from like, you know, a local variable, whatever it is. Okay. So let's go ahead and return a table. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up our table. And I'm going to call this a, I'm going to actually rename this later to a more specific table for whatever records we're trying to display. Okay. But for now, let's just set up the table head. So this is where we're going to have our column definitions. So for example, I'm going to want to have the ID number, and I'm going to also want the, let's see, so we're going to create an endpoint later in the API, and we're going to have a list of books. So I'll call this a title. So that's the title of the book for context, the author of the book, and then the year published. So this is going to be 4 columns, and we'll go ahead and create a table body. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take our table data and we're going to map it into JSX from an array, because that's pretty much how the results are going to be. But for now, I will just simply hard code a couple of data. So for example, let's just say the ID is 1, and then we'll just say the title of the book is, let's see, Percy Jackson and the Olympian. And then the author of that was Rick Riordan, and I think the published date was 2007 for The Lightning Thief. All right, so what I'll do is I will just render this table just so we can get some stuff on our web page. Okay. So we should see a table over here, and that is pretty much it. Okay, let me zoom in a little bit. There you go. Awesome. Now, obviously, we can have more records, but we'll worry about that when we actually you know, get our data from the back end. So let me actually do one more thing. I forgot to wrap this in a table row. So let's do that. Okay. So basically, we're also going to have a couple of buttons as well, and those buttons are going to be able to go backwards and forwards. Okay. So I think what I'll do is I will go ahead and I'll actually put the buttons inside the table component for now, and we can always actually just fix it up later. So I think what I'll do is I'll put the buttons outside the table for now. So we'll have a previous button and we'll have a next button. Okay, and when I click on the next button, it will take me to the next page and give me the next set of records. If I can click on the previous button, it'll go to the previous page and give me the previous records that we were just on. Okay, so it's going to be a very simple implementation. So we're not going to have any like actual list pages, at least not for this implementation, but maybe I'll make a follow-up video on that. Okay, so we have our table set up. We just don't have the remote API set up, so we can't fetch anything. Okay, But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to make an API call to the backend, and we're going to retrieve a set of records. So I think this is pretty much going to be it for the front end, just for now, because we are going to come back to this. We're going to go on to the backend now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go into that Express repository. Okay, and I'm going to just type yarn init-y. You can actually just use npm instead. I personally prefer using yarn. So we're going to do yarn init-y. And like I said, we're doing everything in JavaScript. So we're not going to be doing any TypeScript configuration, nothing like that. So I'm going to install Express. So this is going to be for our web server. Okay. And that should be it for now. We are going to also need to install type-orm. So let me go ahead and do that. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and also do one more thing. Let me just initialize this with Git, because I'm going to upload the code on GitHub so you guys can actually reference this. I'm just add the node modules folder there as well to the git ignore. Okay, so I'll go inside the package.json so we can see our dependencies there. I'm going to go ahead and install nodemon as a dev dependency for those who plan on cloning the code. I think I messed up my dependencies. Whoops. Yeah, I think I was editing it while it was installing. So there we go. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and install nodemon because some of you guys might not have it. But if you guys run this project, it will just use the local version of nodemon. That's why I installed as a dev dependency. Okay, I have it installed globally. Now I'm going to go ahead and just start up or set up a start script. And this will just simply be node source index.js. And we'll start up a start dev script. And this will just be nodemon. So nodemon allows us to restart the application without needing to worry about manually doing it. So it'll do it for us. Okay. But in production, you obviously don't want to use nodemon. So let's create the source folder, and we'll create the index.js file. Okay, so yes, I do have Visual Studio Code opened up for this entire folder, and it has both of the projects. So it might look a little bit confusing, but don't worry. I'll slow it down a little bit so you guys can actually see it. So right now we're in the index.js file inside the Express API Pagination project. All we're going to do is just import Express. Whoops. There we go. Okay. So we have Express. We're going to go ahead and create the app by just calling the top level function Express. And we're going to set up a port. So what I'll do is I'll just hard code the port for now. We'll just set that to 6000 and 6004. Okay. You can also do something like process.env.port or a default port like that. So in case if you have an environment variable that has a port set for the server, it'll read that environment variable. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and also just create an asynchronous function, and I'll call this bootstrap. You can call it main if you want, but you can call it. I like calling it bootstrap. It doesn't really matter. This is just going to be a function that we're just going to call, and this bootstrap function is pretty much just going to start up the application for us. So we're going to basically call app.listen. We're going to pass on port, and we'll just add a console log, and we'll just simply say a server is running on port. There we go. Okay, so we also need to set up the type-orm stuff as well, but for now, let me go ahead and just run the server, and you can see that it's running on port 6004. So we also need to set up the database connection. So that's what I'll do right now. So what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and use the await keyword, and we're going to call the create. We actually need to call the create connection. The create connection function. Okay, and that comes from type-orm. So if we require type-orm, we should be able to get that create connection function. Now, one more thing that I completely forgot that we need to do is we actually need to install the MySQL 2 package, because this is the driver that we need to connect to our MySQL database. So in case if I did not mention, we are going to be using MySQL, but you can honestly use TypeORM with really any, well, almost any SQL database, and you can even use it with MongoDB as well. But I would recommend if you're using MongoDB, stick with Mongoose. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to install that MySQL2 package. So let's just go ahead and that. If you don't install MySQL2, it will actually give you an issue. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and call that create connection. And this is going to take in a connection options type. And that type is just going to be an object that has a bunch of option configurations. So for example, type would be the type of database. So you can see that we actually have a ton of different options that you can use. Okay, but I'm just going to use MySQL. Okay, now I'm actually going to go ahead and put this inside a folder called database, and I'll just call this connection options.js. Okay, and I'll just simply do module.exports, and I'll set the type to MySQL. We're going to need to set the host. So for host, I'll set this to localhost. For the port, I'll set this to 3306. For the username of the database, this is just going to be the username. So I'll set that to test user. And then I'll set the password. So I already have a user created already. So you'll have to be responsible for figuring out what your credentials are in order to connect to your database. And then for the database name, I'm going to call this Pagination tutorial DB. And we're going to need one more property called entities, and this is just going to be an array. So with TypeORM, there's something called entities, and those entities are really just classes that will map to an actual database table. Well, at least in TypeScript, you can use classes. In JavaScript, it's going to be a little bit different. And yes, you can actually use TypeORM with JavaScript, plain JavaScript. We don't have any entities right now, but we will create some later. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just simply import the connection options. So what I'll do is I'll actually do const connection options, and then I'll just do module, and then I'll just export that like this. And then I should be able to just use auto import, and I'll know where to pick it up from. Perfect. So this is imported from the database the connection options.js file. Okay, so we should be able to connect to the database, but it should throw an error. So let's just double check. Before I do anything, let me actually wrap this inside a try catch. Okay. And so yeah, we'll just log the error in case any error happens. So if I go ahead and run the start dev script, it should throw an error. And the reason why it's throwing an error is because it's saying unknown database pagination tutorial DB. Good. I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to go ahead and set the synchronize property to true. This will basically make sure that if I update anything in our entity, it will synchronize well with the database. You do not want this with you do not want this when you're deploying to the actual production server. Okay, because you can actually lose data from that. So make sure you don't have synchronized to true. Only in development, but not in production. But that won't actually create the database for us. So we'll actually go ahead and create it manually. So I'm going to go ahead and just log into my database. So I'll just do MySQL-u, test user -p, type in the password, just test user 123, and I'll just do create database and whatever the name of it is. So I think it was Pagination tutorial DB. And there you go. So I'll leave this tab open so we can actually reference it. Now, I think there probably is a way where you can actually just have it create the database. If it doesn't exist, I'm not sure. But now you can see that there's no error because it can actually connect to the actual database. It knows what database to connect to. Okay, so it's not really the connection that failed. It was just that it didn't know what database it was because it wasn't created yet. It didn't exist. Okay, but everything is fine now. So now that we've set up the connection to the database, what we do next is we need to set up some entities to represent our records. So for example, in TypeORM, we can create entities. So I'll show you guys how to do that in JavaScript. So we're going to go ahead and create a book entity So I'll create a book entity.js file. And what we want to do is we want to actually import this class from entity schema. We want to import this from type-orm. And what this is going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to create a schema for our database. So just for reference, if you guys need any documentation on type-orm, it's fairly easy to use, but I figured I'd show you guys this as well. So you can see that over here, they have the same options that we had passed. Okay, they had everything over here, the type, host port, username, etc. They have their entities array, and we're gonna have multiple entities. And then what we'll do is we'll create the entity right now. So you can see that we basically imported that entity schema, and we're gonna create a new instance of that, and we're gonna pass in an object, and we're basically gonna pass in these properties. Okay, it's really easy to follow along. So what we're gonna do is I'll create a new variable, and I'll call this book entity, and this will just be a new instance of an entity schema, and we'll pass in options. So for the name of the schema, I'll call this book. For the table name, I'll call this books, so all lowercase. For the columns, this is going to be an object, and we can pretty much define each column as a property. So we'll need a primary ID or primary key. So we'll name that column ID, and I'll set the primary property to true. The type, you can set it to an integer, or you can do big ints, whatever you feel like is more suitable for your application. And we'll set it to generated. We'll set it generate to true, so it will auto increment. So we'll also need the title of our book. Whoops, title of our book. For the type, you can do text if you want, but varchar is honestly fine. You can set it to see if it's nullable. So this is really boolean, so I'm gonna set it to false, so it's not null. And you can also set default values too, if you want. Next, let's go ahead and set the author. So I'll just simply copy and paste that as well. And for the year published, we will do the type to be an integer. Nullable, we'll set that to true. And we won't set a default value. But for the name of this column in the database, right, I want this to be all lowercase, and I want this to be snake case as well, with the underscores. Okay. And we don't really have any relations with the book. Ideally, if you want to make this more complex, let's say if you want to have a one-to-one between the book, or maybe not a one-to-one, but one-to-many relationship between the book and the author, because a book can have many authors. What you would do is you would create another entity, and you can actually just have a one-to-many relationship between the book and the author. But like I said, that's out of the scope of this tutorial, because this is not really a type-orm tutorial. This is more of a pagination. We just happen to use type-orm. Okay, but I thought I mentioned that. Okay, so we have our book entity, and now let's just go ahead and just simply export this, and we will import this over here. So book entity shall get imported right up top over here. And now if we look inside our logs, we should be able to see that we don't have any error, which is good. If I go back to the database, if I go ahead and if I type use pagination tutorial db, so we have to step into this database, and let's show all the tables. You can see that that books table is there. If I describe it, you can see that this is the way that the table is structured. Okay, so you'll find that it's pretty much matching exactly how we described it with the entity. So that's the power of type-orm. Okay, so what's next? So what's next is that we actually need, one, we need to set up a couple routes, and two, we actually need some data. So what I'm going to do first is I'll actually set up a simple route. I'm not going to set up any complicated route structure. I'm just going to create a simple app.get. And I'll just simply say app.get/API/books. And this will have its own handler function, which is also a middleware. And we'll send a 200 status. We'll also create another table later. And I'll just set this up for later. So we'll set one for cars. Okay. So we have two endpoints set up, one for books and one for cars. Now, before we do anything else, let's actually populate our database for the books table. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go inside our database and I'm going to manually just insert stuff into the books table. So we're going to insert into books, the values are going to be, so for the ID, I should just be able to do default because by default, it should just auto increment. For the title, I will do the Lightning Beef. For the author, we'll do Rick Riordan. That's the author, Rick Riordan. And then the year published, that's an integer, we'll do 2007 or 2007. Okay, so let me go ahead and just copy this because I am actually going to need to, I'm going to actually just copy and paste this multiple times just so that it saves me time. All right, so I got a couple of books. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste this to save me some time. And just to clarify, the Lightning Thief was actually published in 2005. I didn't know that, but I put 2007. But it's fine. We're not really, trying to be super specific over here. So let me go ahead and just populate the database. So we have data. So now I should have, not users, what am I doing? Books. So I have 46 records. Let's populate some more. Okay. Whoops. So we have 66 records, okay? And like I said, this could be arbitrarily any number of records. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's go ahead and visit the books endpoint. And what it should do is it should give us back the actual API response 200. So let me go ahead and just go to that endpoint. So right now it's going to give us an OK because we're not really doing anything significant. Okay, because we're not fetching the database. Now I'll show you guys how we can fetch stuff with we can fetch the database with type ORM. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and use the get repository function. So what I'll do is inside the app.get, I'll simply just say repository equals get repository, and I'm going to pass in that book entity. So that's going to be auto imported up top over here. Okay. And with this repository, what I can do is I can simply just say repository.find, and this will literally find every single record, every single book record in the database. Now this function is in fact asynchronous. So I'm going to add the async keyword in front of our handler function. And I'm going to just simply say const books equals await. And we're going to send that back as a response. So now if I go over here to my endpoint, if I refresh, you'll see that I can see all of the books. Okay. And you can see that it gives me back every single thing. Now, obviously, right now, it's not really super crazy because we only have 66 records, but you can imagine that if you have thousands and thousands of records, it can be very slow when you're trying to query all of them all at once and send it back to the user, okay? And for that reason, we want to implement pagination. So what we're going to do is on this endpoint, we're going to expect the user to send two query parameters, okay? So those query parameters are going to be the page as well as the count. Okay, so the page is going to tell us what page that we are trying to retrieve records from, and the count is the number of records to retrieve at once. Okay, so the count, you can think of the count as the max number of records to take from the database. Okay, and we're going to use page to actually calculate the offset. So this is where the magic is going to happen. And like I said, almost every single database engine should actually provide this method of querying your data. Basically, what we want to do is we want to search the database by limiting the number of records we return and setting the offset of records to start searching from. Okay, so you can think of the offset as where we should start querying the database afterwards. So let me actually show you guys how that works in just in the database, and then we can translate that over to the TypeORM API. So let's say, for example, if I want to select everything, all the columns from the books table, from books, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the limit, and I'm going to limit to 10. So you can see that by default, it's going to give me every record starting from the beginning, from the very first entry, all the way to the 10th entry. So right now it starts from 1, but this could obviously start from 3, 4, or 10. So it would just start from the first record all the way to the 10th. If I were to delete the first record, so let's just do delete from books where ID equals 1, we now have 2 to 11. Okay? So don't worry about the ID number. It's just going to give you the first 10 records. Now, let's say if we want an offset, okay, so we can limit to 10. The offset, we can set it to 10. So this will give us every single record after the first 10 records. So you'll see that when I hit enter, it's going to give us records starting from 12 and going forward. It will give us 12 to, I think, 20? 21. There we go. Okay. Now, if I were to give it an offset of 20, so we're going to skip the first 20, you can see that it goes from 22 to 31, or the next 10 records. Okay, if I were to set the offset to 30, I think you guys get the idea. So essentially, what we want to do is we want to actually have the offset calculated based on what page we're on. Okay, so the count is going to, let me do this real quick. So the count is going to be a query parameter, and so is the page, but the offset is going to be calculated by using the page and multiplying the page with the count. Now, getting the offset can be a little bit tricky because it really just depends on how you start off, on how you start your page, like what number you decide to start your page on. So let's say, for example, if you choose to have like a page 0, right? So if the page is equal to 0, then the offset would be page, which is 0, times count. The count is only going to change if on the front end, let's say, for example, you have a drop down that allows the user to modify how many records they want to display on the page. Remember, the count is the number of total records to display on each page. So that could change, but for now, we're not going to change it. We'll just say that by default, it's going to be 10. Okay, so the offset is going to be 0 times 10. So page is 0 and count is 10. So that's just going to be 0 initially for the first page. Okay, so let's say if page is equal to 1, let me zoom in a little bit. So let's say page equal 1, count equals 10. Offset would be 10. Actually, sorry, I meant page 0, count 0. So the offset is 10. And that would be correct because you're trying to query the first 10 elements from the database. Now, if you were to start like the page at 1, so 0 would not be considered, your offset would be 10, but that wouldn't give you the first 10 records. So what you would have to do is for your offset, you would have to subtract by 10 every single time if you were to start at page 1. Okay, but we'll just start with page 0. Okay, so our offset will be 0. If the page is 1, that's really just a second page, so the count is still 10. The offset would be page times count, so 1 times 10 would be 10. And now give us a second page. And you saw when we did that with the SQL statement, that gave us the next set of records, the second page. With page 2, this is technically the third page, the count would be 10 as well. The offset would be 20. So it would skip the first 20 records, okay? And those first 20 records would be the first 2 pages. So that's correct because it's going to give us the third page, okay? Everything after the first 20 records, but limited to the next 10. So essentially everything limited, or everything after the first 20 records, and limited to the next 10. So hopefully this makes sense. I'll leave this as a comment for now, okay? But like I said, we'll set it to page 0 by default. So that'll be our page 1. Okay. On the front end, you can just simply add, if you wanted to tell the user what page you're on, you could just add 1. It wouldn't be super difficult. Okay. So we expect the user to have a query string. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reference rec.query, and we're going to destructure we're going to destructure count and page. So all of the query parameters will actually parse into this query object. Okay. And what we're going to do is the first thing we're going to check to see if count. So if count and page are actually there. So if there's no count or if there's no page, we're going to return a status of 400. You can also send a message as well. Well, actually, what I'll do is I'll set the status to 400, and we'll just simply say missing query parameters. Okay. So if there's no count or there's no page, so we're saying that they must have both of these. If one of them is missing, if at least one of them is missing, so if at least one of the count or page parameters are missing, then it's going to give us back this status code of 400 and this error. Now let's say if they're present, if they're both present, we want to make sure that they are actually numeric values. So what we can do is we can actually parse them. So what I'll do is I'll simply say, okay, let me go ahead and do this. If is nan parse int count, or is nan parse int page. So what we're saying here is if we parse count, because by default these are actually strings, right? Or they're strings or parsed query strings, right? We're going to parse them from a numeric string to an actual numeric value. Okay. Now, when you do that, if you pass that into isNan, that'll actually return false because it is actually a number. So is not a number. That's what nan stands for, not a number. That'll actually give us false. So if we actually parse the string, let's say if we parse s, that is actually not a number. So when we call parse int, it'll give us nan. So if you pass in is nan, that'll actually give you true. Okay. So if at least one of this is true, we're going to return a status of 400 that indicates that that is a bad request. And we'll just simply say invalid value for query parameters. Okay, then that's really it. It's really nothing complicated. Okay. Actually, one more thing that I'll do is I'll double check to make sure that the values are not negative values. So what I'll do is I'll just call this count int, and I'll just parse count, and then page int, parse int page. Okay. And I'll just pass in count int right there, and I'll pass in page int because I want to reuse these variables. So if these are actually not a number, it'll return the request. But if they are actually numbers, then we can actually use these values. So over here, we can assume that these two are actually numbers. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to check to see if count int is actually less than 0 or if page int is less than 0. And if that's true, then we will just simply say cannot be negative value. Query parameters cannot contain negative value. Okay, so I think this should handle all those cases. So if they try to send -1 or -2, if they send 0, that will work just fine. But anything that is less than 0 will not work. Because there's no such thing as a negative page, okay? There's no such thing as like -1 page, -2 page. It should really just be, you know, technically it should be 1 or above or 0 above. But for our special case, we'll just start with 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to go ahead and use the find and count method. This actually returns an array with 2 values in that array. The first value is going to be an array of all of the records from the database, and the second value is going to be the total count that was returned. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say books, and I'll call this max. I'll call this max. I'll call this book count. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this back as an object. So books and book counts. So watch this. So let's test our API. So if I refresh, you're going to see it says missing query parameters. So let's go inside our address bar and let's add the page. So let's set the page to 0. You're going to see it's still saying it's missing because we need to add the count. So you can see that it'll give us the first 10. Or actually, did it? Oh, I'm sorry. It didn't because we didn't actually pass in the values yet to actually properly limit the amount that we are taking, and we also didn't pass in the offset. Sorry about that. I actually meant to test this out. So the query parameters are actually working fine, but let's say, for example, if I pass in -1, this should go ahead and give us that. If I go ahead and if I pass in a string, that's good as well. Okay, so if I go ahead and pass in -10 or or a string, let's say if I pass in -0, it seems like -0 still works because we parse it. If I pass in -1, that should not work. Okay, so it seems like that works just fine. So now let's actually make sure that we are providing the search options in our find and count. So that way we can actually get the limited amount of records as well as the offset. So to do that, we can pass in an object and we can specify take. So this is the max number of entities that should be taken. So this will be count. Okay. And for the offset, I don't know, my IntelliSense is blocking my view. So it should be skip. So skip is the offset, and you can see the IntelliSense literally tells you offset where from entities should be taken. And like I said, skip or the offset is calculated by literally just taking counts and multiplying it by page. So I'll actually just multiply that right over here. Okay. And I'll actually just call this, yeah, I think this will be fine. This will be fine. So skip is really just the offset. Actually, you know what? I'll call this offset just so I don't, confuse you guys. There we go. Okay, so now this should return, this should return the number of elements that we want to actually select based on the count into the content, and it'll return everything from a specific offset. So watch this. So you can see now it actually, let's see what's going on over here. Okay, so since we have both of these set to 0, that's actually problematic. Okay, so it seems like we cannot have both of these set to 0 or else it'll give us everything. So that's actually a flaw. So what I'll do is I'll actually say if count is less than or equal to 0. So count must be at least 1. Okay. There we go. Whoops, that's 10. There you go. Now it only gives us 1, and we're on page 0. So now the pagination is actually working. Yeah, so if we set it to 0, that should not work. Because that means they'll get everything back from the database, and we don't want that. Okay, so watch this. If I set count to 10 and page 0, you can see that it gives us the first 10 records. So from IDs 2 up to 11. Now you'll notice that book count is 65, and there's nothing wrong with that because this actually gives us the total number of records in the database, and you actually want this. Okay, that's actually what find and count does. This book count doesn't give you what is actually returned from the limit. It gives you the number of actual records that live in the database. So if there were, let's say, thousands of records in the database, it will tell you that this number is 1,000. Okay, and the reason why this is actually useful is because on the front end, you can actually use this to determine whether or not the user can go to the next page. You can also handle this on the back end as well and send it back to the front end. It's really up to you. Okay, so we're almost done with handling the back end stuff. Okay, what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to actually rename this to results. And I'm going to call this length. Or I'll call this a total results. It's a little bit strange to call this total results because that might confuse the user with them thinking that that's the max. I'll call this total instead. Okay. The reason why I'm renaming this is because we're going to actually have different endpoints that will return different entities. And we also want to support pagination as well. So we don't want to call it something strict. Okay, so this is going to make it reusable on the front end. So we're pretty much done with handling all of this on the back end. So all we need to do is just call the front end, and we need to pretty much call the front end with the query parameters, and we can paginate. So let's go back to the back end, or I'm sorry, the front end. So we're gonna go back to our app.js file. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a folder, and I'll call this hooks. And I'm going to create a hook called use pagination.jsx. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set up the use pagination hook. Really, this use pagination hook, typically a use pagination hook should really just take care of the state. So the state of the current page it's on. It should take care of the size of each page. It should tell you whether or not you can go to the next page. So what we're going to do, though, is we're going to actually make this a little bit, we're actually going to go a step further, and we're going to hook it up with our API calls. But ideally, you could also just separate your API calls with the use pagination hook. Because like I said, the use pagination hook is going to be responsible for controlling what page you're on. And it's going to update the state of the page as well as the number of, as well as the offset. The use pagination hook is basically going to update the state of the page, and it's going to also, you're basically going to be able to use that page to modify your query to the database. Okay, but we'll play around with some things later so we can make this more modular. But for now, what I'm going to do is we're going to use the use effect hook because we're going to make an API call. And like I said, this makes it dependent on an API call. But later on, I'll show you guys how to separate concerns. So the use pagination, what we're going to do is we're going to pass in the count. So that's the limit. That's the amount to actually take from the database. And we're going to pass in an API call function. So this function is actually just going to be a wrapper function that literally just calls an Axios method. Okay. So API call is going to be invoked, and it returns a promise. And that promise is going to give us back our data. Remember, if you've used Axios before, this is how it works. It's going to give us back our data. You can use node fetch, or you can use the default fetch API if you want. But I'm just going to use Axios. Okay, so we'll have to install that. Now with the use pagination, we're going to use the use state variable, or we're going to use the use state hook, and we're going to name our variable results. And this is going to be an array. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to say set results is going to be data.results. Remember, from our API, this assumes that our API is always going to return an object that has a results property. Okay. I'm also going to go ahead and set the total. And what I'll do is I'll call set total. Data.total. Okay, so remember, our API is literally going to send us an object that has results, which is just an array of all of our results, and total, which is just a number. Okay, we'll also set a state variable called loading, so we can indicate that we are currently loading. So inside the use effect hook, we will set loading to true. And then when we are done, we will use the finally, and inside the finally, we will set loading to false. So finally, we'll run this callback function after whether or not the promise resolves or rejects. So it will always run. It's similar to when you do try, catch, and finally. Okay, so we're pretty much done with our use effect. Now let's go ahead and return results, total, and loading. And we're going to return some other things too. But for now, I'm going to show you guys how this is going to work. But before we do that, let me actually go ahead and let me actually cd into React Pagination, and let me install Axios real quick. Okay. And let me just run yarn start again. So inside, I'll create a folder called utils, and I'll create an API.js file, which is really just going to be where we wrap all of our Axios calls. So I'll make a function called, I'll call this fetch books, and this will basically be an Axios.get. Now, I'm not sure why Axios is not auto-importing, but we can just import it ourselves. It's like that. And I did install it in the correct directory. Right, yeah, it's right there. Okay. Okay, so Axios.get, and we're gonna call the URL. So I'll just hard code this. So it's port 6004/API/books. We also need to make this a template string. The reason why is because we're going to need, remember, we need the query parameters, so we need the count as well as the page. So we're going to have a query string, and that query string is going to start off with the count equals to $count. So we're using a template string. We're going to use the ampersand symbol to add another query parameter. So it's going to be page, $curly brace page. And we don't have any authentication, so we're not going to pass in like any cookies with credentials. That's true. Okay, one more thing that we need to do, and if we don't do this, we'll actually get a CORS error, and I'll show you that real quick. So what I'll do is I'll actually go inside app.js, and I will call use pagination. I'm sure my IntelliSense always wants to be slow. All right, I guess I got to import use pagination manually. Okay, that's not a problem. Okay, so for use pagination, we need to pass in the count as well as the function. So for the count, we're going to pass in 10, and for the API call, we're going to pass in that fetch books function. We're going to have to go back to use pagination, and for API call, we're going to pass in the count. I forgot to do that. So we have to pass in count, and we have to pass in the page. So remember, the use pagination hook is also responsible for keeping track of the page. So we'll set the page by default to 0. But you can also set that to 1 if you want to. You'll just have to, like I said, handle that on the back end accordingly. So API call will be count. Well, it'll pass in count and page. Okay. So now if I go over here, you can see that if I go to our React app now, you can see that if I go into the console logs, you'll see that it gives us a CORS error, and that's completely fine. We can fix that. We just have to go ahead and go inside the Express API. We need to install CORS, and we need to enable CORS. Okay, so let me start up the server again. So back into the Express app, we simply import CORS. So let's go ahead and do that. And we can just simply do, let's see. I guess I'll do that over here. I'll use CORS origin. So that'll just be HTTP localhost port 3000. Okay, so we're setting the middleware over here because we are calling the bootstrap function. So that should work just fine. Now if I refresh, let's see. I think maybe it's problematic. I think it's because, yeah, I think I know what the problem is. So we have all of our routes over here. So yeah, I think that's why. Because I think it actually also calls these functions too. So let's fix that. Let me just move that over here. It's not a huge problem. Okay. Okay, that's completely fine. So let's do that. Now let's refresh the page. And there we go. So you can see that there's no more CORS error. Now if I go back to the React app, and if I get that results, you can see that it should just log right over here. Okay, there we go. Okay, cool. So now we can go ahead and populate our table. So what I'll do is I'll simply just go over to table. I'll pass in results like so. And what I'll do is I'll delete the hard-coded data. And I'll simply do props.results.map. And we'll create a table row. And for each table row, we'll have its own table data. So we need the result.id. We'll need the result.title, author, and the year published. Okay. There we go. So you can see that we have our dynamic data loaded. Let's also make sure we give a key as well. So we'll do result.id. The key. Just that we can get rid of that warning. Okay, cool. So now that we have our data populated, we need to obviously make this. We need to paginate the data. Okay. So how do we do that? So we need to implement functions that will actually update the state variable of page. Okay, and it'll basically make another API call, and it'll give us the next set of records. So this is actually very, very easy. So what we'll do is we'll create a function called next page. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll just simply update the page by doing page +1. You can also just, yeah, I think this is fine. Yeah, this should be fine. And for previous page, we'll just do set page is just going to be page -1. So what we're basically doing is we're taking the value of page and we're just adding one for next page if we're going to next page, and we're subtracting one if we're going back one page. Now what we're going to do, and this is where the magic of the useEffect hook comes in, we're going to pass in page, the state variable page, inside this array, also known as the dependency array. So you see that useEffect has two parameters. It has the callback function, also known as the effect function. So that's the effect to run. And the second parameter is the dependency array, okay, also known as the dependency list. So this is important to understand because every single time the state variable that is inside of this dependency list is updated or is changed, it's going to run the useEffect hook again. Okay? It's very important to understand that. Understanding that allows you to solve many issues that you might have with useEffect. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and just fetching data for, let me actually write a log. So fetching data for page. And you'll see where all the magic happens. So by default, useEffect will run one time, okay, on the first render. And what's going to happen now is, since we added the page state variable to the dependency array, whenever the next page or previous page functions are called, it's going to update the state variable page. And because we update the state variable page, since that is part of the dependency array, it's going to cause the useEffect hook. It's going to cause the useEffect callback function to run again. So watch this. So we are returning next page and previous page. So let's destructure that. So next page and previous page. And let's go ahead and attach an event listener onto our buttons. So on click for next, that'll be next page. And for the previous, on click, that'll be previous page. Okay. So if I click on next, look at what happens. You can actually see that our data changes. I don't know if you guys can see that. Hopefully, let me actually zoom in a little bit. Okay. Let me actually zoom in here. So if I click on next, you can see that the data is changing, and you can see that in the logs. Let me refresh again. So you can see that in the initial logs, it says fetching data for page 0. Okay. And it gives us our data. When I click next, it says fetching data for page 1. So you can see that the state variable was updated, and then it fetched our new set of records. Okay. So if I click on next, it's going to go ahead and literally give me a new set of records. If I go back one, it's going to go back. Okay. Now, if I obviously click previous now, it's actually going to give us an error because you're going to see that it's trying to call the API with a negative value. So we should also handle that accordingly. Okay. But you can see that our pagination is definitely working. So what's actually happening is we're essentially, we're basically modifying the page, okay? And remember, every single time we update the page, because that's all we need to update. As long as we update the page, that'll calculate on the back end a new offset, which will give us the new set of records for us. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and implement a couple more functions. Let's go ahead and implement can next page as well as can previous page. So these are going to be these are going to be functions that return computed values. So can next page is going to return a boolean, and really all it's going to happen is it's going to check to see if we can go to the next page. Now, how do we know if we can go to the next page or not? Well, it's very simple. What you do is you take the total number of records, and what you want to do is you want to take that and divide it by the count, the amount of records that are on each page, and you want to take the ceiling of that value. So I'm going to show you guys what that means. So let's say, for example, if I were to divide, let's say, for example, we know we have, I think, 65 records in the database. So let's say, for example, if I take 65 and if I divide that by our count, which is the number of elements per page. So the count is 10, right? So 65 divided by 10 is 6.5. Okay, now that's going to be the number of pages, but there's no such thing as 6.5 pages. It's really 6 pages and one more page that holds 5 more records. Okay, so when we reach that page, we can pretty much say, listen, we've reached this page. We can no longer go to the next page. Another thing that you could do is you can actually just check to see if the length of the results that was returned is if it's less than the total for each page, so the count for each page. And because obviously, if let's say, for example, each page holds 10 records, but the current page only has 3, then you know that there's no more records in the database, because remember, we're taking max 10. If it only gives us 3, then it's not going to, then if we go to the next offset, it's not going to give us any more. So that's 2 ways that you can handle it. But what I'll do is I'll use the total that's fetched from the database. But there, like I said, there's many ways that you can do this. It just depends on how you implement this. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll say const total. I'll do const. What I'll do is I'll do const current page is equal to page plus 1. Because remember, the page is always, because we're starting at 0, we're always going to have an off by 1. Okay, and it's also important because when we divide the total number of records with the count, it's going to always round it up by 1. So it will never actually give us 0. So that's also why we need to add by 1 as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say const, let's see, last page is equal to, and the last page is really just the max page. So math.ceil, and that will just simply be count, or not count, sorry, total divided by count. Okay, so like I said, 65 divided by 10 will be 6.5, rounded up will be 7. Okay, and since we are always starting at 0, 6 is really the last page, so we add 1. And we can just simply check if current, so we can just simply do if current page is equal to last page, we can return false. I think we can actually just simplify this, so we can just simply do return current page is not equal to last page. Yeah, that should be better. So if the current page is not equal to last page, then we can go to the next page. Okay, can previous page is actually really easy. All we need to do is check to see if the page is not equal to 0. Very, very simple. If page is not equal to 0, then we can go to the previous page. If the page is currently 0, because we're starting at 0, then we can't go to the previous page. Well, if we start at 1, then we just check to see if the page is not equal to 1. Okay, very, very simple. So let's go ahead and return those from the hook, and we can use them accordingly. So watch this. So let's go ahead and do can next page and can previous page. So essentially we want to disable the button so that it cannot be clicked. So we'll disable the button for can next page. So disabled. So essentially if we cannot go to the next page, so think of it like this, think of the logic, right? So if can next page returns false, then we want to disable the button. So if can next page, so if not can next page, and we're going to call that, remember it's a function. And for can previous page, so if we cannot go to the previous page, then we need to disable the button. And let's look at our code and let's see what happens. So you can see that on the UI, you can see the previous button is disabled. If I click on next, the previous button is enabled. And if I paginate, it goes all the way to the end. And you can see that we have the last 5 records. This is page number 7. And you can see that the next button is disabled. All right, well, that's pretty much it for this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys did, leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you aren't already. And definitely check out my other videos as well. If you guys need any help with this tutorial, I have a Discord server. The link is in the description. The code for the front and the back end will both be on my GitHub, so feel free to check that out. And if you guys have any other questions, leave a comment down below or ask me on my Discord. So until then, I will see you guys in my next video. Peace out.